Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Evan.
Ryan.
Elmer Soderblom's ace.
Must be nice.
I want to feel out, are you now more pro Elmer Soderblom, or is the jealousy pushed him down your depth chart?
I guess I didn't text you this. A guy in my Friday morning, we only had two groups, so our eightsome got a hole-in-one Friday morning. So we're on the patio at 10:30 in the morning. We're the only ones on the patio.
So did you witness it? Was it? Or was
they were in the
other
group behind us.
That's tough. So they
didn't even see it go in because it was like a hidden pin.
Oh, no.
And they got up there and the guy's like, where's my ball?
And you had to look back and witness that.
Oh, we were way ahead of them and they're yelling at us like from across a pond. It's like, yeah, he told us the story 8 times.
For those of you who don't know, the reason I got into golf is because Evan would not shut up about it on the show for the first 8 years we did this podcast. And last year I picked it up because I was like, my God, man, fine. And I did it. And half of my motivation now is because I want beginner's luck and I want Evan to be there to witness me getting an ace before him. I think that would just be objectively the funniest possible thing that could happen in this dynamic.
That would be very unfortunate for me, but I would be happy for you.
That's very nice of you to say.
But I've seen your swing, so the chances are still that I get one before you.
Yeah, you know what? If I'm going to come in here swing, it's only fair that I get a shot my way. It does feel a little bit more hurtful based on where I'm at right now, so I'll cry after the episode.
I welcome Elmer Soderblom to a charity match play any day of the week.
Grand Rapids Griffins, let's make it happen. That would actually be very fun. And halfway through, they'd reveal that it's not actually Elmer Soderblom that you're playing, it's Brad on my shoulders in a trench coat. Which would be, I think, just a touch shorter than Elmer, but we could fool you.
Neither of you look very Swedish, so it might be difficult.
It might be difficult. Well, folks, there's still Detroit Red Wings and hockey content to discuss. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Hockeytown, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be talking goalies. Husso not bought out, how Detroit's goaltending situation now versus the future was ranked by The Athletic as extreme as it gets. We'll talk about Detroit's pipeline, who they'll have down in Grand Rapids and beyond, what they'll have in Detroit with the Red Wings next season, and what to expect. Some other minor Detroit Red Wings news before we jump into an interview with Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit, good friend of the show, to catch up on what's happening in the world of Detroit Red Wings offseason contract negotiations, lineup projections, all things Hockeytown Outlook, and then we'll get into some NHL news before we head into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that the Winged Wheel Podcast is almost primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to some great benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, answer any questions that didn't make it to the main show. Additionally, you get access to our bonus off-season episodes where we kind of discuss more evergreen topics that is a little bit more, it's still hockey related, but it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more off the cuff. And, we just enjoy it and try to give the patrons something different to listen to make up for the fact that we're down to one a week in the off season. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community. Additionally, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, for the past 2 seasons, we've given away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Ville Husso is still a Detroit Red Wing. We speculated that there was an option for Steve Yzerman to buy out Ville Husso. He was kind of the prime candidate for a buyout that was generated by the signing and settlement of Joe Veleno through an arbitration settlement before the actual hearing started. So again, the Red Wings got a 48-hour window after that signing, and no buyouts were completed by the Red Wings. So Ville Husso remains on the team. Detroit sticks with no other way to put it, goalie logjam. They have Alex Lyon, they have Cam Talbot, they have Ville Husso, and they have Sebastian Cossa and Jack Campbell in Grand Rapids. There are some decisions to make, moves to make, or the Red Wings are going to have to carry way more goalies than what they want to yet again.
You know the joke that's always revolving around the hockey world, how does this affect Toronto? How does this affect Seider and Raymond? I know this is a goalie episode, and I'm not going to stay on this for a long time. But the whole reason we even had the Husso buyout conversation wasn't because anybody here was super anti-Husso or, whatever you want to call it. It was, are they going to have enough cap space if Seider and Raymond want to both go long-term? As of right now, with what we anticipate those two getting, the answer would be no. But there's still very easy ways to get them under. And one of them still revolves around Husso. Because we look at the Red Wings 23-man salary cap hit projection going into opening night based on what we think the ballpark of Raymond and Seider is going to be if they both go long-term, which is the ideal scenario. The Red Wings need to clear up $1 or $2 million in order to get there. They still get that if they just send Husso to the minors. They get a little bit of cap relief, about $1 million, give or take. They could do that with another player as well. If the team is fully healthy, there's nothing that states you have to carry 23 players. So if they don't want to carry 3 goalies on the roster, even though they have 3 goalies on the roster, they absolutely don't need to. They can send one of them down. Not ideal considering they're all NHL caliber goalies. And if it is Husso that goes down, that's a lot of money you're eating. But it doesn't mean the be-all, end-all for potential 8-year deals for Seider and Raymond. And I do think financially this was the more prudent move because even if the Red Wings don't have a plan for Husso, it's probably better to eat it this year than add to future cap hit.
I agree with you that it was more financially prudent. And, you focus in on the numbers a lot and you start to see ways in which it could come in even without a lot of surgery. Like you said, Brad, simply sending someone down and getting that minimal relief off their contract, $1 million, give or take, that could do it. Also, if the long-term deals hypothetically for Seider and or Raymond come in and you're talking 7 years rather than 8 years, the number will go down. The AAV will go down because you're buying fewer unrestricted free agency years. And so it will be cheaper. And is it going to be by a lot? Is it worth it for 7 versus 8? Whatever. That depends on the, very obviously intense negotiations, even if they're not meeting and talking every day. But that 500,000, 250,000, 1 million, whatever it might be, that could be the difference. So it's easy to think, okay, if Seider and Raymond ideally both go 8 years, it's going to be a lot of money. But buying out Husso would have been plenty, to put it generously. It would have been more than enough, and it wasn't necessary to do it. Now, I'll transparently admit, if Yzerman went down that route, I wouldn't have been, sad or mad or thought, oh, that's the wrong move. I would have thought, okay, great, now they have a lot of space and they can work with it. And you stomach the buyout hit for 2 years, whatever it is. But still, the Red Wings aren't, out of options, as you say, Brad. So for me now, I'm looking at what do you expect for the Red Wings in net this year? Because they have Alex Lyon, who, he had the cut on his hand, but he'll be ready for the start of the year, the Red Wings said. They have Cam Talbot, who they essentially wanted to come in and be James Reimer, but a lot better for Detroit. And now Ville Husso, who's this big unknown, because in his first year with Detroit, he showed for at least a stint how he could be in that, 1A, 1B mix. But after that, based on injuries and poor play, even before the injuries, he's not a guarantee to hold, a top 2 spot. There's even a sense of, can he get healthy? Or is he going to just end up on LTIR for Detroit next season? It's a lot of what ifs, but he's not exactly the foremost option in people's minds when they think of who is going to be the 1A, 1B tandem for Detroit next season.
Well, we know how much Alex Lyon can play, and it's not as much as what he played this year. So I would imagine they want to, really contain the number of games he starts and fill in with Cam Talbot where required. I think Cam Talbot played 50-ish games last year. They probably want to mix in all 3 of those guys, and injuries happen, of course. So it's a nice plug and play option with 3 capable guys, and any of them can take the net. It's really a performance position right now.
Along this vein, The Athletic released basically a series of rankings discussing teams' current and future goaltending outlooks. And Detroit's overall cumulative ranking, considering those factors and, the cap, was 18th in the league. The funny thing is, Their current outlook was ranked dead last, 32nd, and their future outlook, based on who they have in the pipeline, was ranked number 1, top in the league. So this kind of analysis has Detroit, as it stands right now, going into the next NHL season, as the team who's worse off with the biggest question marks, and they're going to struggle in net based on who they have as options right now. But in the future, they think no one's better off than Detroit. And I thought that was kind of funny because I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say Detroit's current situation is kind of very uncertain and their future situation is very good. But I'm not sure how many people would put either one at, their respective extremes of that spectrum.
I would. I couldn't agree with it more. And, I tweeted something along those lines and I got a lot of pushback. No way the Red Wings goalie is currently 32nd in the league. And there's about 3, maybe 4 other teams you could make an argument for. But the most optimistic take I can give is they're in the conversation for 32. Even if they're not definitively 32, that's their ballpark. They're in that tier, that bubble, whatever you want to call it. And I also agree they have the best future. I don't think Cossa or Augustine individually is the best goalie prospect in the world, but we've seen time and time again over the years, top-end goalie prospects just don't pan out. And it's not as high a percentage as, say, forwards. And you don't really know what you're going to get. Now, a lot of them do hit. We've seen Shesterkin, Sorokin, Ottinger in recent years of guys who were projected to be great goalies become great goalies. So it still happens. But the best way to hedge against your future number 1 guy, ensuring you have that future number 1 guy, is to have multiple of them, which the Red Wings are the only team that does with Cossa and Augustine. They both could be number 1 franchise goaltenders. If Cossa goes down in flames this year, the Red Wings aren't screwed because Augustine still got a chance, and vice versa. If Augustine absolutely blows up this year, but Cossa keeps up his trajectory, the Red Wings are still good. It's the best way to hedge against it. Whereas on the opposite side of things, we were talking about it before, and everybody knows me. I'm a pessimist by nature. So obviously Detroit coming in at 32 doesn't shock me, and I don't disagree with it because they have 4 options, arguably 5 if you want to include Cossa. And there are gigantic question marks around every single one of them. Lyon was tremendously inconsistent last year. So who knows what you're going to get out of him this year for 30, 40 games, whatever it is. Cam Talbot got propped up by arguably one of the best defensive systems in the NHL last year. Is he going to have that same success behind, let's call a spade here, a terrible defense? Husso can't string together 2 healthy months. Jack Campbell, we don't even need to talk about. The question marks there are obvious. And Cossa probably shouldn't even be in the conversation for the NHL at this point in his career. But here we are because of all the question marks. And do I think that Lyon or Husso or Talbot individually, any one of them, is likely to take off as a number 1 this year? No, that's why they ranked 32nd. Even though you have 3 options, all of them have been very good for stretches. There's way too many question marks to say anything with certainty.
The only thing I'll push back on there is I don't think Lyon was tremendously inconsistent. I think Lyon was burnt out and then became inconsistent. Because Lyon, when he was on and held the net and wasn't at, way more games than he was used to playing, actually his lows weren't that low and his highs were very high for me. So I think the Red Wings strategy of trying to recreate.
I'll push back a bit on his lows weren't that low. That last couple weeks.
No. Before the fall off.
I can agree with that.
Because everyone in net's lows were the whole team's lows were very low, save for like Lucas Raymond essentially when things got bad before they tried to make the miracle run to save it at the end. But still, I think if you can get Lyon back to where he was before he was burnt out and basically tried to recreate a starting goalie in the aggregate. Is that a model of consistency and certainty, and is that going to, make you happy in the NHL? Statistically speaking, no. But I do think it's much better than what the Red Wings had last season. Like, I'm much more inspired by Cam Talbot than I am by James Reimer, and I'm more inspired by the fact that there are 3 options now, or like you said, 5. I'm going to remove Cossa from the equation. I just don't think this is his season, barring him going absolutely nuclear. Jack Campbell, you never know what happens. If he does come up due to necessity or if he catches fire. I don't think it'll be forever, but I think it's perfectly plausible. I like that the Red Wings have basically more kicks at the can here. They have more darts at the dartboard. Is that the way to solidify your net? No. Everyone would much rather have a Vasilevsky, a Sorokin, a Shesterkin, of course. But I think there's more to, one path is to more to support Alex Lyon. And he plays the right number of games, and you get halfway decent goaltending out of Cam Talbot or Ville Husso to supplement. Cam Talbot takes off and maybe he's good even despite not having LA's defensive system. Then you have Lyon to fill in, so you're not asking an aging goalie to play a ton of games. Ville Husso comes back, stays healthy, gives you 30 really great games. Awesome. Like, I can't argue that they're in the conversation for 32nd, but I do think this has a chance to be much better than 32nd.
Everything you said there is objectively true, but the outline around it is, and you did a good job of prefacing this, but those are all maybes. Mm-hmm. None of those things I'm confident is going to happen. I would actually argue I'm more confident every one of those things isn't going to happen. Now, you did allude, there's 3 of them. It only takes 1. And you're right. And that is the bet the Red Wings are making. But the counter to that is there's 100 goalies listening to this right now who hate the idea of ever being involved in a trio in net. You hear the words rhythm, consistency.
Yeah, that's all real.
They hate it.
Yeah.
They hate it. They hate it. They hate it. They just want 1A, 1B is their everybody's perfect scenario. And if you have an elite goalie, you have a 1 and a 2. Red Wings don't need to worry about that. So
not for a little while. Nice being number 2.
Oh, yeah. Man.
But
do you love
the hot dog guy?
Backup quarterback with the clipboard in his hand. That's who you want to be.
Yep. 4th from the bullpen.
But the point being is, yeah, any one of those things you laid out absolutely could happen. But the fact that we have to reach for such possibilities is why the Red Wings rank 32, because it's kind of like the conversation we have with the team. If the offense keeps up the pace they did last year, if this new reworked defense can up their game through systems and a better team structure, and if, and we've seen over the years, we've been suffering through a near decade rebuild where every year we say, if this happens about 1 million players and 1 million things, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't happen. We have seen it time and time again. When we have to reach to find out this is how you succeed, it almost never works out that way. And last year, it got very close to working out through all the ifs and buts, but do you see that repeating itself? I have a hard time. I can see a world where the forwards do what they did last year again. I can see Newsy digging his claws a little more into the defense and you get some more production systematically. I'm the most pessimistic about the goaltending because in a good scenario, it's the biggest wild card. We saw Ilya Sorokin lose his starting job going into the playoffs this year. Like, even the best goalies in the world have their down years. So when you have 3 gigantic maybes, it doesn't inspire any confidence.
It's funny because the thing I'm most pessimistic about is the defense, because I think Detroit's improvement on defense this year hinges on 2 things, and neither of them I think you can put money on happening, and I wouldn't have that expectation. One is Simon Edvinsson having a fantastic year, because, that net addition to the team would be amazing because you're coming from essentially below league average. And 2, Yzerman making some kind of a move to improve the defense. I guess a faint third is if the team defense game changes even more, like you said, Brad, to try to encourage and support the defense and the holes in it from the forward group. But I think the ifs that you can maybe bank on and say aren't completely unlikely are the forwards and the goalies. Defense is where I draw the line to say I think best case scenario is that this defense is average.
And before anybody takes what I say out of context and I sound like an idiot more than I normally do.
Oh, don't worry. I edited it so you sound like the biggest idiot possible.
Perfect. I didn't say, just to be clear, the words I'm optimistic about the defense never came out of my mouth. I'm just less pessimistic about the defense than I am the goaltending.
Brad rates Detroit's defense as number 1 in the league. Signed and sealed.
In goals against? I could see that.
Yeah, I think the defense is better this year with the addition of Simon Edvinsson, so I'm hoping that also boosts the goaltending. They're going to reciprocate off one another, right? So I'm not as doom and gloom, but I'm definitely not all that thrilled with what the goaltending prospects looks like for this season. But the Red Wings have various options to ride someone if they find some form of consistency and some form of positive starts.
Moving towards the future, though, Cossa, Augustine, you add in Gylander in there, who's done really well since he's been drafted. You add in Landon Miller, who's recently picked. Like, all of that factors in, and what a change for Detroit. You alluded to it, Brad, but Detroit has options now. You are not resting the future of your team's, net minding situation on one guy's shoulder, and Cossa is a fantastic prospect, but hardly a certainty because of the position he plays. Goaltending is extremely hard to project out. Teams don't get it right very often. And that was a lot of draft stock put in him. And he wasn't a guy that was, based on how he plays. And when we talked to Sebastian Cossa, he even said this himself, less NHL ready to start, but, a higher ceiling. If you want to call it project, that's probably a little bit too experimental in term, but still, he had a long way to go before he's NHL ready, and he still does. You now have Augustine, who has been sensational. You now have other players down in the pipeline who are going to be able to backfill when any one of those guys graduates to the NHL. So it's really cool to see that aspect of the Red Wings system turn around like that. And it's one less thing you have to worry about, right? You don't have to spend even more high-end draft capital in the future. You can not worry about, not having any goaltenders signed for super long term, because no one in Detroit's pipeline is a Shesterkin or Sorokin or Vasilevsky, so they don't deserve it, an 8-year contract or whatever. But if you have guys signed for 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, that makes sense, because you're essentially just bridging along until the Cossas are ready, the Augustines are ready. And that's a success of the Red Wings pipeline and how they've turned that around.
The Red Wings only have one veteran goalie signed beyond this season, and that's Cam Talbot. So you have to assume that Cossa is already eyeballing that spot in Detroit next year. And I think it's very in play for him, because this year he's expected to handle the bulk of the workload for the Griffins this year. He had a phenomenal breakout season last season, was tremendous in the regular season, got better as the season went on, was great in the playoffs. He did everything you could have asked him to do last year. Now the request is do more. We're going to give you more games, and we expect same, if not better results with a bigger workload, more on your shoulders. And if he holds up well this year, yeah, we could very well be sitting here the same time next year going, yeah, it's Talbot and Cossa this year. That's the tandem. And we're not talking about, this or that third string, fourth string option. Is Cossa playing 25 games or is he playing 40? Like, that's the ideal scenario. And now you're just bridging Talbot and some veterans until Augustine's ready. In a perfect world, again, statistically speaking, are both Cossa and Augustine going to hit? No, that's just how it works. Could they? Yes, absolutely. We're just talking improbabilities here. Cossa having already done it at the professional hockey level, and he has the frame, because it's funny too. Not only do the Red Wings have two of the top goalie prospects in the world, they could not be more different if you tried. Augustine, the smaller goalie, but quiet, steady, very technically sound, very calm in net, not a big talker. Kossa's the giant athletic freak who loves to run his mouth, is super freaky athletic in the net. And there's no right or wrong way to be a goalie in the NHL. Both these can work. We've seen it all over the NHL. But it does create this fun little dichotomy of, hey, if they both pan out and you have a 1A, 1B situation in the NHL, you can almost pick the goalie to tailor to the opponent you're playing. Oh, this team's a volume shooter. We need the calm, steady guy. We're throwing in Augustine against Carolina. Oh, this team loves to pass it east-west. There's going to be a lot of lateral plays. We need Cossa in there because he's got to get to him, like a Tampa Bay style system, if you want to call it that. That'd be the most fun I've ever had watching goaltending since Hasek was in the league. But again, statistically unlikely, but the Red Wings are in a really, really good spot because odds are one of them is going to be the guy for a long time.
Also, as we mentioned, Jack Campbell being in Grand Rapids, as is planned. All of this can change because, Yzerman will find a landing spot for Husso elsewhere, for example, or something will happen. But as of right now, Jack Campbell being down in Grand Rapids, as is the plan, can only help Cossa too, because that's someone with NHL experience, that's a veteran. When Campbell went down, it wasn't perfect the whole way. It was rocky at points in the AHL for him when he was with Edmonton. But he found his form and was having a lot of fun down there. And that can only do good things for the future of Detroit's pipeline, their netminding.
And it's about time Grand Rapids, Michigan per 60 started catching up to the Red Wings.
Yeah, that's right. Because that really, it's just both sides of the state right there. You have to boost it. That is the goaltending for Detroit. Very quickly, here's some other news. Aaron Kahn, director of hockey operations for the Detroit Red Wings, has also now been given the assistant GM role under Steve Yzerman. So he is an assistant GM alongside Kris Draper and Shawn Horcoff. So that is just an extra title. He's going to remain director of hockey operations as well. So just a little bit of administration in that update there. If anything else comes of that, we will be sure to update you. All right, up next we have Max Bultman, but very quickly we are going to take a break to let you know about who is supporting the Winged Wheel podcast this episode. We love a great deal as much as the next podcast, but we're not going to take a bunch of slap shots to the shins just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile told us it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, we called them on it. We gave a longtime Winged Wheel podcast listener a chance to try Mint Mobile, and the first things they told us were that activation and setup were super easy, and how simple, effective, and user-friendly the Mint Mobile site is. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. There, you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number, along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. That's mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Okay, now time to be joined by Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit. Obviously, we wanted to let Max relax and enjoy his summer break. Very well deserved, but there's a lot happening behind the scenes for the Detroit Red Wings, and it's about time we had Max back on the show to get his updated perspective. So enjoy this conversation on all things Detroit Red Wings, the offseason, projections forward, and more with Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit. Max, next time I tell you to enjoy a well-deserved summer break, just call me on it right away, because I think you were a day into your time off before I texted you asking about a spot on the show and hockey stuff. So I'm not a good friend. Don't ever let me put up the face in front of people.
You're a great friend. You let me have 10 to 12 days before we actually followed through on it. It was all good. I got my time off.
All right. I'll take that olive branch. I appreciate it. Max Bultman, in the throes of the offseason, has taken his time generously to join us on the Winged Wheel podcast. Max, great to have you back. I believe this would be the first time talking since the Wallman trade, and actually a lot has still happened since then. So welcome back to the show and lots to talk about.
Yeah, let's see. So that was the week of the draft, before the draft. So we had all that, then free agency, then dev camp. And yeah, it's definitely, now we're into the World Junior Summer Showcase already.
Which is where you just were.
Yes, I got back like a half hour ago.
So we were actually chatting beforehand, but there's some fun Red Wings takeaways from that. What stood out to you?
Yeah, well, obviously Trey Augustine had a really nice start for Team USA as expected. He didn't face actually that much action. But the guy who really caught my eye was Max Plante. And he's a guy really since the draft that I've kind of been looking at more and more. I saw him at dev camp, and I look at the profile of this really skilled, smart player, creative player. And I kind of thought, okay, well, he doesn't skate that great, but I can kind of see a version, like a version of Jonathan Berggren that coaches trust a little more here. And that was kind of my takeaway from him coming out of dev camp. And then today, well, really actually 2 days ago, I went to the first day of practices there, and that's who Team USA decided to put on their first power play unit just to start camp. They're going to get a ton of different looks, I'm sure, on their first power play unit with James Higgins, who I think will be the number 1 pick in next year's draft, Zeev Boyum, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault. So he's the guy that they threw with all of their kind of star players on power play 1. And I have to imagine that the hockey sense and playmaking ability is a big part of that. Lo and behold, in game 1, he scores their first goal. And I think he had a 3-point night. I don't know if they credited him with what I thought was the second assist. Either way, it was a nice play, kind of on the rush, cross slot, seam pass. And I think it would be the secondary is what he would end up getting, but he either had a 2-point game or a 3-point game. And so it was a really nice outing for him, and, talked to him afterward. I thought this was interesting. You know, he's got a baby face, right? You've seen him. Looks really young.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I've always kind of wondered, okay, does that mean he's got a little more physical maturation to do? Could he shoot up beyond kind of the 5'11" he's at and, fill out, get stronger? I went and talked to him today, and I promise I am a 5'11 and a half man. If I was any taller, I would be screaming it from the rooftops. I got no reason to lie about 5'11 and a half. He's taller than me. So I think he's actually already 6 foot. Either that or his shoes are taller than my shoes. So I thought that was interesting too. So coming together into we'll see what the rest of this camp looks like. We'll see if he makes this team in December. I think he has a chance to, and I think he has a chance to be a nice little piece for the Red Wings here. A guy that I think right now I'd probably put toward the back part of the top 10 Red Wings prospects with a chance to really rise. He's not going to like the flashiest offensive kind of producing college team. He's going to play for Minnesota Duluth, where his dad played, where his brother plays. But I think this is a player to watch in the Red Wings farm system.
Cool to know that the immediate excitement from that pick in the draft has already proven to be a little bit fruitful into something you can take away as a Red Wings fan. So nice, almost 30 minutes later report from Max. And I'm glad you got that at least, Max, because this offseason has been a lot of the same questions and conversations, and not because it's not reasonable. They're important conversations, but, reading your last couple of mailbags with the Athletic Detroit, people are thinking about the big things, the Seider contract, the Raymond contract, the maybe Berggren contract. Where does he fit in? Those are some of the standouts. Where are you on, let's start with the big ones, the 2 big RFAs, Seider and Raymond. What, in terms of what's transpired, what the Red Wings might be looking at here in terms of bridge versus long-term in their current cap situation?
Yeah. And, you look at the Red Wings today, I think they've got about $17.5 million left for 3 players, obviously, Seider, Raymond, and I think it will be Berggren as the third, obviously. You expect that one to come in right around $1 million. Maybe it's slightly under. Maybe it's, because he does have a little NHL track record, maybe he can get to $1 million. But that doesn't leave that kind of 17 number. After that, you get that deal that we kind of thought, okay, if they have 17 left, they can fully max out, Seider and Raymond. Now, there's different things they can do here to clear up $1 million. They can bury a contract in the AHL. They can, make a move in some way, shape, or form. They can just play one short. So they can still do the 8x8 or 8x8 plus, I should say, for both of those guys if they want to. I do think it's hard not to notice that and wonder are they trying to go for a thing that's like, well, help us out. We literally only can give you 8.25, 8.4, come in under Dylan's 8.7. It's all we got, right? I don't know if that will work out. I don't know if that's their strategy. It's kind of the first place my head went. I think they do want to get the long-term deals done here, the Red Wings. Certainly, I think Yzerman's even said that on Raymond. All along, I've thought that's the more essential one to go long on. I just think the possibility of one of these 2 guys scoring 20 more points in one of the next few years, heavily would tilt toward Raymond. Even though obviously he's already the much higher scoring player, being the winger versus the defenseman. So, is it possible that it could end up Bridge, Seider, long-term Raymond? Certainly possible. I don't think that would be the end of the world, but I'm still watching for these, 7 or 8 year deals to come in here. And I have a feeling we're going to be waiting a little bit because usually you don't see it get done the first day of August kind of thing, right? It's either going to happen right around the draft, right around free agency, or closer to camp as there starts to be a little bit of deadline pressure, okay, are you going to be ready for day one? That kind of thing. So if it's not done by now, my natural gut feeling would be, okay, then you're probably going to be waiting till there's a little bit closer to something that looks like a deadline to somebody.
So obviously those two are going to dictate the bulk of what is going to happen with that 17.5 million approximately. The Berggren question is still important for people though. Like, people are thinking, is Berggren actually going to have a spot on this team? Does he want to be a part of this organization, or is he still kind of peeved by his lack of play in the NHL last season? You know, despite the small contract, what is the role for Berggren? Because he's largely going to be asked to fill in some of the offense that's gone from Sprong in that bottom six, for example, but still has the same questions about his game that prevented him from being on last season's Red Wings.
Some of it is kind of how does he approach it, right? On day one, do I think that he's in the top 9? No. If everyone's healthy, I would not think so. But I think there's a power play spot for him on day one. And I think, you know, the Red Wings haven't minded. I know people think fourth line and they think, oh, they're just out there to check. But, you know, my projection on their fourth line this year is Veleno and Tyler Mott, which is probably not the most exciting kind of, at least with Mott, kind of offensive line mate. But Veleno and Berggren have had some chemistry. They seem to have some off-ice chemistry, certainly. That fourth line scored some goals, I should say, for the Red Wings this past year. They kind of shelter it. It puts you in good situations. I don't think that's an inherently bad spot to be. Fourth line power play too, for a young guy is still not a terrible place to be. Obviously though, I do think there is something to be said for, he probably hasn't gotten the NHL time that you would expect to have gotten this past season. And, you know, if there's, you know, lingering feelings on that, but to me, it's just what other option, you know, he's not going to go back to Sweden, right? The Red Wings still have his rights. So the only team he can sign with. And if you want to play in the NHL, you kind of got to be willing to play in the NHL and prove that you, play for the team that has you and prove that you should be higher in a lineup or whatever. So my expectation at this point is that he will be starting on the fourth line. And if he plays well in that role, I don't see any reason that he can't move up the lineup at various times, various injuries, various situations, you know, looking for a spark, whatever, especially if he's playing well in the power play too. And, you know, you see him build chemistry with some of those players higher in the lineup. You know, I just think that it's hard to envision, you know, him knocking out Alex DeBrincat, Lucas Raymond, Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, for one of those top 6 winger jobs. And I know in people's mind it's 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. But that third line is the one that, you know, takes a lot of tough matchups. I don't think that's how you want to use Berggren. I don't think that's how Berggren is maximized in those situations. Let this guy play, with the puck in the offensive zone. And even if Tyler Mott's a little more of kind of a classic checker than, you know, a scorer, I think that the situations that line could be used in are conducive for Berggren. You know, and as long as he's willing to kind of, give that a whirl and, you know, see how it goes, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to come to an agreement on a contract kind of thing.
There was an interesting conversation that you've addressed and it's been kind of going around about Derek Lalonde, but I don't really think we can get there until we talk about how this team has changed from pre-draft to now. And that's a pretty broad strokes question, but, you know, separating it out into the 3 units, forward, defense, and goalies. Detroit has made, you know, a lot of individual moves, but the prevailing opinion, and a lot of this has come from Steve Yzerman himself, has been not a lot has changed functionally in terms of how this team's going to go forward, their chances compared to their competitors, et cetera. Starting with the forwards, what do you make of where the Red Wings are now, the changes they've made, and how they're positioned for the future? And then we can go to defense and goalies.
Yeah, I wrote a column on the first day of free agency that I think some people felt was a little rash because it was early in free agency, and they do go on and they signed Tarasenko and Mott, so more moves did happen, but it didn't really change my overall opinion, which is that they kind of treaded water. I used the word stagnant, which I think upset some people, but I don't think that's, you know, I don't think it's an inaccurate word of where they're at. I still think this team is going to finish right around the same point total that they were last year. And it, you know, maybe it's a little, Yzerman said maybe it's a little ahead because there's some guys that kind of fit better. And I think he's referencing, guys like Mott there, as more kind of classic bottom 6 players than what they had last year. I also think there's an argument, in my opinion, I think they'd be a little behind that, just because there is a lot of offense on the way out. I think they can get better defensively, especially if Simon Edvinsson is ready to be like a 20-minute a night stopper. And I think that's entirely possible. But I just want to see it, and I want to see it, how much it balances out with, the shooting percentage regression that I think we all expect to come a little bit. They were the 3rd highest shooting percentage in the league last season. Maybe they can keep that up. They had some really good shooters on the team, and they've only lost a couple of them. But I think it's realistic to expect it'll regress at least a little bit. And if that costs them 10 goals over the course of a season and you're already losing some, raw firepower from your team. I just think you have to be a lot better defensively to make up for that. Maybe they will be, but my opinion is I think that they're, more like a high 80s team than the low 90s team they were last year, which I don't think it's like a dramatic, huge problem, but that's kind of my assessment of where they're at. And we'll have to find out what that looks like come opening night.
We opened this episode by having the conversation centered around actually the article that has been going around The Athletic about Detroit's ranking in terms of their current goalie outlook and their future goalie outlook, where they're on either side of the spectrum.
Did that surprise you?
I thought the fact that it was the exact extremes was a bit surprising, but the general range was fine and good for me.
I don't think it's the 32nd goalie duo right now. I also don't think it's the number one they probably do have the best goalie pipeline, but that's still a little bit of a quantity over, neither Cossa nor Augustine is the best goalie prospect in the world right now. They're both very good goalie prospects, but there's also young goalies in the NHL. So I was just surprised by that. I think we're going to have Jesse on a national podcast on The Athletic this week, and I am hoping to be able to ask him about a little bit of the methodology there, because I was surprised by both. You're probably right. It probably ends up in the right place. But the route to get to there, I don't think they're the 32nd goalie pool right now. I think they're probably somewhere around 20. And I don't think they're the number one future. They're probably somewhere around 10, right? So I think they probably belong in the middle. But I was surprised at how they got there.
Yeah, it's a question of they didn't really consider Detroit's current system of trying to create a goalie in the aggregate for the now, but for the future they did. And so I can see the logic behind. I can see the logic behind it, though, because, you really just need, if you're the Red Wings, you need one of Cossa, Augustine, Gylander, Miller, whoever else to really hit and be your goalie of the future. And that's a big ask, but you have a couple at least good kicks at the can. And as Brad talked about earlier in the show, very different goalies between Cossa and Augustine. So you're not trying the same thing twice, and that's good. Along the same vein, I don't know if you can copy and paste it to the now, but I don't really hate Detroit's, strategy of trying to give Lyon the support of Talbot and then maybe Husso. I don't think it's a guarantee. I'm not going here saying it's the best strategy, but if you can't find yourself a Shesterkin, a Sorokin, what have you, this isn't a bad way to go about it in the interim. Yeah,
Lyon, I believe, was a 904 goalie last year. I would have to look and see where league average finished up, but all year it was kind of bouncing between 903, 904. Okay, so he's the definition of league average, and you're expecting 30-ish games from him. You bring in Talbot. I am very sympathetic to the fact that he's in for a new experience this year in Detroit compared to where he was at in LA. But what surprised me is when I think of Cam Talbot, just look at his career, and it's just 910, 913, 911. He lives at 913, and that's exactly what he was last year. And even though he was with, one of the better defense corps in the NHL, I just kind of expect that he's going to be right where he's always been, 908, 919. I mean, I don't think 919 this year, but I'm just reading you his things. He's had 1 year at 892, 1 year at 898. Everything else in his career is 908 and above. And so I just look at that and I think, okay, so this is, to me, there's the little more uncertainty around it. And that's why I'd put it more 20, especially on the Husso range because of the injuries. But if I'm saying I think the top two goalies this year are Talbot and Lyon, to me, it's kind of the definition of league average goaltending tandem. Even if maybe the look of it, you're kind of saying they're doing it in the aggregate. I like that phrasing. It's not what Connor Hellebuck plus Laurent Brossoit looks like. And it's probably not going to be that good, but it does give you kind of just one goalie who's the definition of league average and one goalie who for his career has generally been above it. Maybe he's in for another one of those outlier under 900 seasons. He's getting older, but I'd bet on him being right around 904 too, I think.
And the floor coming out from beneath this looks like, the defense just poisons the well too much and just no goalie's gonna. And that's a very big possibility. But to me, I see Lyon, Husso, depending on health and if he's on the team, and Talbot as a substantially better draw than Lyon and Reimer last year, which is what they ultimately had to rely on. And so I can see them getting, a few more points on the board, even more maybe than last season, not because these goalies are worth so many points in the standings, but because Detroit lost so many points in the standings last season because of catastrophic goaltending from Burke.
Yeah, and when I wrote that column that I referenced earlier, and actually I just realized I never really answered your question about the forward group. I just got off track about that column. But
what does it matter? There's no rule.
The one thing that I said they clearly upgraded was in goal, and that was because of Talbot. So that did surprise me. But I guess there's not that much to say on the forwards anyway. I think Tarasenko's a little more offense than Perron, a little less, jam and wall play and all that stuff. And it probably equals out to about the same place, just to mea culpa that previous non-answer.
I think there's definitely opportunities for Detroit to, get outside this range on either end. But I think whether you're pessimistic or optimistic, I think the 10-point range is 85 to 95.
Yes.
I can see sub 85, and I can actually see a lot of things going well for them and maybe even, going 97, 98. It's all possible. So moving forward with the assumption that, let's say this team is about where they were last year.
But would you say 82 likelier than 97?
Yeah.
I would too. And so that's where I think, okay, you're in the same range, but I would lean a little backward as opposed to same range, lean a little forward.
You know what would change it to the positive outlook for me though is Simon Edvinsson having an 80% of what Mo Seider's rookie season was.
Yeah.
Because if he does that transforms the defense. Yes.
And you have two of those guys now. That's the biggest difference is that if he's ready to, and I think he might be he has put in his time, right? And
yep.
I really liked him down the stretch. I thought 85% of his games were top four all day. And, he had a couple games where he looked like a rookie, but, I think we'll see what they're willing to put on his plate. And I don't think that they put the hardest minutes that they could have put on him last year. And I'd be curious how willing they will be to do it this year. But I think there's a world where he's a 20-minute guy and I don't, maybe 30 to 35 points without much power play. And I think you're oh yeah, I see how this could work. Right. And we'll see. I think it's possible, but I want to see it before I put that into my prediction kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's fair enough. It's a big if, but I agree with you. Short of it being Mo Seider, Simon Edvinsson has passed every test so far.
Yes.
If he's attached to Jeff Petrie all season, then he's just not going to take a lot of those hardest minutes off Seider's plate.
I like those two together though. Oh, right. You're saying the difficulty in minutes. Yeah.
So, and that's the limitation to me. So all this compiled though, then it gets to the Lalonde question. And I don't think it's an unfair question to ask, right? If Derek Lalonde comes in and the Red Wings have, a step back to 87 points, is he on the hot seat? I've seen, the speculation or the assumption that he would be. And, spoilers, I just can't get there personally because I think this is still a product of what Steve Yzerman has done. And that's not a massive, we're going to knock Steve Yzerman and he should be fired. No, I think a lot of this is here's what Steve Yzerman could do within the constraints of how his tenure has gone. But where are you on the Lalonde future conversation? Because to me, it still feels too far.
So this was a mailbag question I got. And my first reaction was similar to you. That's not fair at all. And then I looked up the longest tenured coaches in the NHL. And then I saw that he was 11th already after 2 years. And then I looked a little closer and I saw that I think the next 4 or 5 above him were all hired within 3 weeks of him, which makes him functionally tied for the 6th longest tenured coach in the NHL, which forced me to remember how absurdly fast NHL teams are making cut bait decisions on their coaches. And so I completely agree with you in the should sense. He should not be on the hot seat this year. He's improved significantly the team under him the last 2 years. And I think, his roster does not really give him in my opinion, a wide path for more improvement this year. I wouldn't think that it's fair to judge him on, playoffs or no playoffs, whatever, going forward. But when you look at how fast teams are making these decisions and that there are some expectations for him, whether you or I think they're fair or not, the public seems to think that they need to continue to take. I do think they should obviously be trying to take steps forward, but it just on a practical level, do I think it's likely? No. So to me, that would add up to saying no, but that's a tough recipe for a coach. And so like I went from reading that question and almost like rolling my eyes to thinking like, I think he might be in a tough situation. I don't think hot seat is the right word, because I don't think like the Red Wings are looking at him like, oh, you better get there. But like the track record on guys in his position, it would indicate that that's a tough spot to be in. And I actually feel for him in that spot, because if it's me, I'm looking at this group and I'm like, I've taken steps the first 2 years. How big of a step can I realistically take this year? And if there's going to be one, I think it has to come from, we talked about guys like Edvinsson, just an overall internal defensive growth, because Tyler Mott's going to help you a little defensively. Eric Gustafsson's probably a marginal defensive upgrade on Shane Gostisbehere, though I wouldn't expect him to come in and be Brett Pesce for you if anyone's expecting that. I think he's still going to be like a third pair defenseman that you're probably giving sheltered minutes to, and hopefully he can feast in those sheltered minutes in the third pair, which I might add, if you go look at Shane Gostisbehere and Olli Maatta's underlines together, they kind of did too. So you're hoping that he can basically just do that maybe a little better defensively and give you something close power play wise. But other than that, it's got to come internally. And so that to me is where the pressure is on Lalonde and on this coaching staff, is the defensive end of the ice. And it feels too early for me to be talking about it, but I can't deny that when I went and looked at some of that stuff, I went, there might be something to this.
I don't want to go too far and rob ourselves of future content for the rest of the summer, but the last point I want to talk about is, we look at lineup projections, and whenever I drop the lineup, I really can't think of anything too much different than what you put out in your articles, which begs the question of which, if any, of the young guys are going to make some noise, potentially crack the roster, be the first call up. Is there kind of a leading candidate in your mind? Because there's a group of three it's really hard pre-camp to see which one is head and shoulders above the rest.
To me, it's Mazur for two reasons. One, he's the oldest. And so I think he's got kind of there's the least pull for like, a little more seasoning, no problem. Kind of, he's already 22, right? And the second thing is he plays on the wing. And I obviously, if a guy's great at center, you're not going to say, oh, well, we just have no room for him. They do. They can move anyone to the wing. But I think there's an obvious place for him on this third line next to Andrew Kopp and Michael Rasmussen, or if you want to get weird and move stuff around even more. I think that could be a really effective line as long as Mazur comes into camp. And the question on him is just size, mass, really, like, can he put on some muscle? He's a thin kid and he plays a really hard game, and you want to make sure his body's going to hold up to that. But he's the one that I see a path for. And if it knocks Christian Fischer onto a fourth line, and by the way, this is where things would get precarious for Berggren, as if Carter Mazur makes a roster push, all of a sudden you could have a fourth line that is like a classic checking line if it was like Fischer, Veleno, and Mott, or you could scratch, I don't see him scratching Fischer personally. I don't really see them scratching Mott personally. But who knows, right? And they just gave Veleno a contract that suggests they're not planning to scratch him too much either. So that's where it could get sticky for Berggren, but things will change. And other than with Justin Hall for most of last year, very rarely do you have like the same scratches all season long. And so I think he's the guy that could disrupt things a little bit. I think he's got the clearest path, and I think he's got the most natural lineup fit to be what they need and to be in a situation where he can succeed both ways.
All right, Max, you have a pickup hockey game. Sorry, not pickup hockey game. You have a beer. This is serious stuff. You have championships out there.
This is I'm subbing in this one.
Oh.
So it's not the anchorman, my beloved anchorman, but yes, I do have a skate to get to pretty soon here.
Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit. Find him. Go to M_Bultman on Twitter or X if you are with it, and click on any of the links that Max posts and subscribe to The Athletic right from there. That is the best way to support Max and get access to what I think is pound for pound the best writing in the NHL. Max, thank you so much for joining the show. Hope to do a lot more of this as the summer goes on. Appreciate it, man.
Well, that's high praise because I got a lot of pounds on me, so I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on as always.
Have fun tonight. Throw those around.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back. Just some quick NHL news here before we jump into overtime. First, Patrick Laine, it was reported by Elliot Friedman that he is clear to return from the NHL and NHLPA Player Assistance Program. Laine is reportedly still recovering from shoulder surgery, and as we know, he was on the trade block, as was announced a little while back. So teams interested in acquiring him have been informed that they're free to contact Laine now, so they're just trying to figure out next steps. He's getting healthy and he's out of the program, so there might still be news yet to come on Laine. You know, pre-free agency, I would have thought this might be a target for Detroit, but I think that's a lot less likely now. You never know what's going to happen, though, and he has a big number, even if not for a long term, for teams to deal with as well. So we'll see what happens with Laine.
I wish the Red Wings had space for it. That'd be a fun experiment.
It would have been if nothing else, it would have been very, very fun. Speaking of offensive player, Travis Konecny, he got paid, man. 8 years, $8.75 million per year for the Flyers star. 27 years old, right wing, right shot forward. So there were a lot of natural comparisons to, is this what a future deal for Lucas Raymond? You know, the joke of how does this affect the Toronto Maple Leafs, you said earlier, Brad. How does this affect the Red Wings? That's what we do on the show. And this one actually could in a way, but still, just in terms of Konecny himself, he got himself paid. Cap going up, so adjusting your internal kind of measure of what value is. But that was a little bit more than my immediate thought was, oh, Konecny got rewarded for everything he's done for the Flyers.
Yeah, there's a bit of a thanks for everything you've done. There's a bit of, we know we're buying all your UFA years right now, so we have to pay the UFA premium. But this is the risk you run of, you know, signing a free agent in the 25 to 28-year-old range, because that's when their value's at the peak, because they've had enough really good years under their belt to prove their value, but there's still enough runway where they can argue, I want top dollar for every single one of these years. And yeah, Konecny is a great player, obviously. So it makes a lot of sense. But his career production per season, like, it's very comparable to what Raymond just did at 21 years old. So there is a bit of a comparison there. Right shot, top line winger. You know, not that they play exact styles, but there's a lot of similarities between the two. So, you know, there is some parallels that could be drawn here.
Importantly, Konecny is first team all guy. Like, that's just a dude for sure. Very popular on and off the Flyers. So when I saw that one, I was like, good for you, man. That's a guy you like to see rewarded. One of the most entertaining players to hear on mic'd up videos.
I was literally just about to say, every game he's not mic'd up is a mistake by the NHL.
Yeah, and Flyers fans will go to bat for him. If you see, like, they talk a lot about, you know, the way the Flyers played the last few years maybe held him back in terms of what he could do. So even if a bit rich at all, like the Flyers don't seem too pressed by this. Now they have a lot coming their way offensively, and that's a whole different story, and that's another Eastern Conference foe for Detroit to worry about. But that's neither here nor there. There may be parallels to draw on, you know, what it might look like in the future for Lucas Raymond once you factor in inflation of the cap. But for now, that is a big, big contract for Travis Konecny. But we can't go through this podcast without talking about what was probably the biggest story in the NHL world this past week. Stan Bowman was the first of him and Quenneville to be reinstated to the NHL, and he was hired by the NHL team who arguably did the best in the offseason so far without a general manager, Jeff Jackson, who was, you know, heading up hockey operations and had that kind of president role, but was just filling in after they let Ken Holland go and his contract expire. They were doing wonderfully. They were doing great. And then they brought in Stan Bowman. There's a lot to be said about the, you know, Kyle Beach situation. We would need so much more time in this episode. I'll leave a link in the description of this episode, which will give you a recap in case you need a refresher or aren't familiar with it. It is a very sensitive topic and it's very heavy, so be forewarned. But still, after time away from the game that was mandated by the league and evidently a lot of work behind the scenes, the league reinstated him, and Edmonton found it necessary to bring in Stan Bowman and his lofty general manager resume to head up Connor McDavid's Edmonton Oilers.
It's unfortunate because I don't know if I can ever bring myself to cheer against Connor McDavid, but boy, the Oilers are sure trying to make everybody do just that. And it is worth mentioning, because, you know, we've talked at length on this podcast that people deserve second chances if they've earned it. Sheldon Kennedy, whose word in this sphere carries a lot of weight, said publicly, Stan has done his work to understand why what he did was wrong, to better himself, to help that cause going forward. he did reach out to Kyle Beach before the announcement was hired and said he had a productive conversation with him. So if a guy's putting in the work, there is something to be said for that. Is it enough to overcome what he did? To most people, no. And I think I probably fall in that camp. But all that aside, all that prefacing you have to do, those mental gymnastics, PR salvaging, whatever you want to call it, for a guy who sucks at GM. It's not like they hired one of the best GMs in the league here. This guy inherited a loaded team, won a couple cups. When he actually started making moves, they were almost universally terrible. Somehow holds a record of losing 3 separate Brandon Saad trades. Like,
how about a fourth?
Like, this guy is genuinely bad at being an NHL GM. If Joel Quenneville gets hired, we're going to say all the same stuff. But then at the end of it, it's going to be met with, yeah, but the guy was legitimately the best coach in the NHL when he got unceremoniously punted to the moon. So you at least understand why teams would jump through PR hoops and take the hit and yada, 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 because you are getting a quality hockey coach. The Oilers didn't even do that. They're shooting themselves in the foot to further stunt Connor McDavid's career. And the thing is, McDavid and Draisaitl are so good, it might not matter. They just might win anyway, because Jeff Jackson got the Arvidsson deal done and the Skinner deal done, and they still have the McDavid and Draisaitl contracts from previous general managers. So I can see a reality here. I'd argue a likely one where the Oilers win the cup and Stan Bowman gets all this praise, even though he'll objectively have had nothing to do with it. It's hilarious how unfair the hockey world is.
Well, I think what they're trying to do is the whole, what Vancouver has. Patrick Laine is a fine GM, but Rutherford's calling a lot of shots there. A maybe different version, but just general structure, what Toronto had with Brendan Shanahan and previously Kyle Dubas and now Brad Treliving. Like, yeah, the president of hockey ops is the big ideas. He's the one kind of pointing the direction, and the day-to-day, the guy, making connections with other teams and keeping up. That's the GM. You don't want him to be pulling all the strings and making all the moves, but you want him to kind of be facilitating what your plan is. So how much agency Stan Bowman gets versus Alvin versus Treliving, that's going to differ based on organization. But in general, they're looking for a facilitator and someone who's well connected and respected. And that might, anger some people to hear. No matter who you talk to, if you talk to anyone in the NHL, like in that in-group, Stan Bowman is well regarded as, a GM and a person they like working with in the NHL. Still now, was talking to 2 different people in completely different spaces, and that was the sentiment shared about Bowman. And yeah, the point you made, Brad, like, was the amount of work that he did, and is this person's opinion enough to make up for all the pain caused to not just Kyle Beach, but multiple others? That's for other people to figure out. That's not for this space. Why a bad GM? Like, why a bad GM? And even if you just want him to be basically, to put it kind of aggressively, and this might be too diminishing of the role, a puppet, pick anyone else. There's a million of them in the NHL. He's not the only well-connected, well-respected guy. It's just a dumb move.
Pierre Dorian sitting there. He's the master puppet. He was Eugene Melnick's puppet for his entire time in Ottawa.
But the difference between Stan Bowman and Pierre Dorian, at least publicly, is Dorian seemed like a very likable person.
Very true.
Well, that's my thing. Like, Bowman was very well liked. Like, very well liked.
Who's his dad?
That's a big thing there, right?
Yeah.
Jeff Jackson is still going to be guiding what the Edmonton Oilers do. Like, they're not going to go back to the Ken Holland era of decision making, where a GM who is from an old school way of thinking and doesn't have a good track record in this era of the NHL is going to tank their opportunity to win a cup with Connor McDavid, Lyon, Draisaitl, and others. But I just felt like it was so avoidable.
Just why?
Why
was the question.
Gotta say, there were a lot of Oilers fans who are sharing the same sentiment of why. Like, there isn't even, okay, you can look past the scandal, but just why? Anyhow.
Maybe they really want Brandon Saad.
He's the missing piece. We should have seen it all along.
Maybe. All right. We are going to move on from all of that, whatever that is. A very quick note here, though. The news that came out very recently, Jeff Marek is no longer working at Sportsnet, obviously very popular as one of the hosts of 32 Thoughts alongside Elliot Friedman. Jeff Marek is a good friend of ours and has been on the show multiple times, and really, really great friend to not just the show, but to us personally. And we wish Jeff Marek nothing but the best. He is excellent at what he does. We are excited to see what comes next for him, and all the best to Jeff Marek. All right, let's move on to Overtime here. Overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Again, benefits like the bonus overtime episodes, the bonus off-season episodes, the Discord, the giveaways. You allow us to do things like host Winged Wheel Podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins in support of the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to produce other great content like Expected by Whom, who were the first to have an active GM on their show in the network, and it was on their show, not ours. So they continue to dunk on us as they had Eric Tulsky, who is now GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, back on the show. So go give that episode a listen. Prashanth and Shawn are doing amazing work. You'll also allow us to continue to run this show in the offseason and lots more. So again, patreon.com/winged wheel podcast. Chim Kim Nutgets says, Brad is right that deadlines drive negotiation activity. What is the next important date or milestone for the Seider, Raymond, and Berggren contracts?
People don't want to hear it, but it's going to be training camp. Like there's nothing relevant in the calendar for the Red Wings between now and then. Now there could be some, in-house deadlines about, okay, at this date, I'm worrying about organizing training camp and X, Y, and Z, other things to prep for training camp. So I don't want to talk about this after this date, but I don't think Raymond and Seider's agents are going to have too much sympathy for that. So I'm going to say it's going to be the training camp.
No Justice, No Petrie says 2 questions. First, what are the odds that Johansson turns into a well above average defender?
Odds?
Yeah.
30. I think he's going to be competent, but well above. He's an undersized defenseman who doesn't play physical and isn't super fast. He's not a poor skater, but he's not like, a Cale Makar level of skaters. So everything genetically that you would want to see in an NHL above average defender, he does not have. But what he does have is
the brain for it.
So if the brain is elite enough to overcome those shortcomings, possibly, but again, we've seen it time and time again, those players are rare. I think Johansson can be a very good bottom pair defender in the NHL who can spot fill on the second pair and be adequate at it, but I don't see him being like this, well above average type of defender.
I think a good outcome for Johansson that's not crazy to think about is a 3-4 guy. Is it likely? It depends on how you want to handicap that, right? Like, I think, every prospect of his stature, you can't sit here and say, yeah, there's a 70% chance that they're going to be a very, very good defenseman. That's just not the nature of those kinds of prospects and where he's coming in. But I really like the way he thinks the game. So compared to other players that are coming in, of the same mold as him and in the same position in the depth chart, I'd say better than others. So is any number 7 D-man prospect going to come in and have a high percentage arbitrarily of being a well above average D-man? No, but I think his is decent as far as, relatively speaking.
With his size and skill set, if he didn't have the brain he has, he wouldn't have made it this far.
Exactly. So let's see how far that takes him. Second question is, Evan, how was the farewell show for Misery Signals?
How does this person know this?
Oh, I like when you guys do this. I like when you guys make...
How does this person know this?
Someone just was in the crowd behind Evan going, I'm going to freak him out.
Maybe. That is if you can uncover parts of Evan's enigma of a life and deliver it in this way, this is objectively the most funny way to do so.
Yeah, it was awesome. I took Catherine with me. So her summary of the event was loud, but it was awesome. I had a really good time.
Hockeytown Racing Academy says, in terms of greatest hockey players of all time, how much higher would Steve Yzerman be up on the list if he didn't have to play in the same era with prime Gretzky and Lemieux?
Oh, man, much higher. there was a year he won the Ted Lindsay over both of them. He didn't ultimately get the Hart in the same year, but there was a good long stretch there of prime Gretzky and Lemieux where Yzerman was literally the best player in the world that wasn't them. And because he doesn't have Hart trophies to his name, because he doesn't have Art Rosses to his name, it does diminish the legacy because, you know, people, when they talk about the greatest of all time, will reference cups, hearts, scoring titles, Rocket Richards. And Yzerman never got one because of when he played.
Well, he got cups.
He got cups, but he didn't get the individual accolades that he would have in other eras.
Yeah.
Like 10 years earlier, 10 years later, he comes into the league, he probably has multiple of each.
All right. Ariel says, how long should an NHL team be without a captain? One person posited that there should be a captain named every season, and vacancies should only happen if your captain is traded at the deadline. Are we biased because Detroit seems to have standards for captains that other teams don't? If there isn't a captain, does one of the A's get chosen to be the spokesperson to the officials, or does it vary? Cheers.
Over time, like this was something I used to hold a very strong opinion on. Over time, I've realized how little I actually care about this one. I don't think it's a big deal either way. If I had to be pushed to one side of the fence, I'd be pushed to the side of you always have a captain. Because I understand, you know, a team's in a rebuild. Maybe the guy you want to give this C to, and you know you're going to give this C to, like we did here in Detroit forever, was going to be Larkin. You can pull aside a veteran guy that goes, hey, you got 1 year left on your contract. We know you're probably hanging the skates up at the end of it. Or, you know, we're just not, whatever the situation might be. And go, you're getting this C for this year. And then it's going to that guy in all likelihood. But, you know, mentor him. Yada, yada, yada. Your C is your reward for mentoring this guy. So I would like every team to have a captain at all times, but I genuinely don't care.
I used to think it was a sign of organizational weakness and a little bit of messiness if they legitimately had no one they could lean on to be a captain and they went a season or multiple with just a bunch of A's. And part of me still believes that. But yeah, over time, I've kind of come to realize there are situations that are unique and not the Red Wings way, so to speak. I do think it's better to always have someone. In terms of which A's can go talk to the ref, yeah, they'll generally designate internally a guy and refs will know who that is, but it can cycle. Regardless, I think I don't like the look of teams that just have a bunch of A's and they cycle, but not every team is always going to be in a position to be able to do that. And I think the glory years of the Red Wings that we lived through is probably kind of messing up that perspective when a lot of the league would think, well, which player do you want it to be? Because all of these guys are going to be irrelevant in 3 years.
Yeah, like if you take the current Red Wings and you pretend Dylan Larkin doesn't exist, he's not there. Is anybody really that upset if the Red Wings go, we don't think Raymond or Seider are going to be ready for that C for 1 or 2 years, so here's your stopgap, and they just give it to Ben Schrott in the meantime? Nobody's going to be upset about that. And from all accounts, the guy's great in the room.
Patrick Kane is literally sitting right there.
With how this organization operates, Evan, let's be real on who would get it. But nobody's going to be upset about that. It's a good look for, it's a feather in the cap of some guy who doesn't have a memorable career, but all of a sudden, if he can retire one day and go, yeah, I was captain of an original 6 team, that means a lot. He'd probably take it really serious. And if you explain to him, this is temporary, he'd still probably go, I'd prefer that than never having it. Sure. Yeah. It's like your job to run this ship for now. You're mentoring this guy because we want to give it to him in the future. This is your job. Here's your reward for doing it.
Wings in the Wild says, what do you think will be the Wings' most unlikely but great line next year, thinking outside the top 6? Also, what player on next year's roster will have the best social content, excluding Lyon, as we all know he is undefeated in this category?
Unlikely?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could only jumble that top 6 on paper so much right now.
Outside the top 6.
Yeah, so...
Andrew Kopp's going to start a YouTube channel.
But what I'm saying is I don't think anybody from that top 6 is going to be playing lower in the lineup, so we kind of have to deal with...
It's going to be the Danielson, Berggren, Mazer line. Don't ask me how we get there. We said unlikely. That's the line that it's going to be.
You know what line I could see working pretty well, actually, if it ever gets jumbled to this? Veleno, Rasmussen, Fisher. I could see that being the ultimate pain in the ass line. If Veleno can take a step to get to where Kopp kind of is defensively right now, Veleno brings a little more to the table in terms of speed. That could be a real aggressive line in terms of like forecheck and transition and all that fun stuff. Just an absolute pain in the ass to play against. But that does hinge on Veleno taking a step, hence why unlikely.
More Christian Fischer content, please. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. Stay tuned, patrons. There's going to be something bonus coming for you midweek this week, at least one thing. And then that's in addition to the bonus overtime, which we're about to record. Thank you all so very much for listening to the Winged Wheel podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. And if you're a listener of old, appreciate you listening for all this time. To all of our patrons, we could not do this without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support, but Patreon's not for you, you can leave us a rating wherever you listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, on YouTube, give the thumbs up, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Tell a friend about the show. It does make a big difference. Those ratings, those thumbs ups, everything. To all of our supporters on Patreon, again, you are amazing. Our name level supporters. Also, we should thank Mint for sponsoring this episode. Huge shout out to them. Great to work with. Yet another new sponsor of the Winged Wheel podcast. To our name level supporters on Patreon: Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutininaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Devin Lobstering, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hissam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jim Kalmbach, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube. That's what I appreciate about you. The Iser Type, Tiger McDougall, brand new name level supporter, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, General Andy Bohan, the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A. Ron, AB, Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, and Stanislavski, new name level supporter, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nutgets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarplus Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, D-Bots, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, Jackson Hole, Wyoming Truther, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joe and Reese's Pickle and Boot Shop, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy Navs Country, Muffin Man Bran, new name level supporter, welcome, Ophelia, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings and Pizza, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.